Hello, everybody. My name is Adele Frizzell. I am the founder of Adele Frizzell LLC, and I work with my team over at adelefrizzell.com. Today, we are going to be doing a weekly Facebook Live on the topic of intermittent fasting. I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about intermittent fasting by now. It's become a bit of a popular thing. I think that there is some do's and don'ts if you're considering intermittent fasting. So let me take a dive into the pros and cons of intermittent fasting, who it could be good for, who it might not be good for. And this is important because, you know, people get excited about certain approaches to weight loss. And some of these approaches are not always good for everybody, okay? So just if you can give me 5 minutes here, I think this is gonna be a quick one today. If you have any questions, just type in the comments. I will be monitoring them even after this Facebook Live ends. If you're watching the replay, great. Feel free to ask a question in the comments and I will answer any questions you have about intermittent fasting there. All right, so as always, we take a science-based approach here, and we believe that there are many paths to weight loss, and intermittent fasting is just one of them. Okay, so what is intermittent fasting? First of all, it is time-restricted eating. It's the act of limiting yourself to a window of time to eat. Now, typically, this is about 8 hours long, meaning you're fasting for about 16 hours and you're eating in about an 8-hour window. This can vary though. Some people will experiment with shorter feeding windows and some people will have longer feeding windows. As an example, some people will fast from 7 p.m. to 11 a.m. and they'll only eat between the hours of 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's considered a 16-8 fasting window. Okay, so you're not eating for 16 hours, nothing passes your lips except maybe tea or water, nothing with any calories anyway, and then you're eating in that 8-hour window. Other people might fast from 7 p.m. to 9 a.m. and only eat between the hours of 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. That would be a 14-10 fasting window. So they're eating within a 10-hour window and they're not touching any food or any caloric beverages, you know, for the other 10 hours. So who is this good for and who isn't it good for? Well, intermittent fasting can be good for people with a busy schedule. People who prefer to eat larger meals rather than maybe 6 small meals. People who don't feel hungry until they actually start eating, and there can be hormonal reasons for that. And people who prefer to actually work out fasted. Okay, so maybe they like to get in a morning workout. They don't want any food in their stomach. They would prefer to eat later in the morning after their workout. Or actually they could also be working out in the evening, so they want to have their dinner and they don't want to eat anything after that, and then they go hit the gym and go to bed. So who is it bad for? Okay, because everything has pros and cons in life. Intermittent fasting, we wouldn't advise for people who are underweight, people who have a history of eating disorders, people who prefer to eat more frequently, like smaller meals, and people who find that they tend to overeat whenever they restrict themselves, you know, and there's a huge psychological component here, but people who can perceive restriction sometimes rebel against that and then they overeat. And so an example of this is if you are starving yourself, you feel like you're starving yourself, or you perceive yourself as starving yourself for 16 hours, and then you give yourself 8 hours to eat, you could eat a lot of food in those 8 hours and you're not going to lose weight, because ultimately weight loss comes down to under eating whatever your caloric needs are for the day so that your body burns fat tissue as an energy source. So another reason why intermittent fasting might not be good is for people who are trying to maximize the amount of muscle mass they can build. Okay, so we'll get into the reasons why in a second, but it's really up to you how long you want to fast. Okay, there are no rules about this. There's only guidelines, and there's kind of better practices and best practices. Some people will go as long as 20 hours fasting and give themselves only a 4-hour eating window. And probably about 2 decades ago, I met a young man, he had lost about 80 pounds intermittent fasting, but it wasn't in vogue then. He just kind of hacked his own system and figured it out. He was a restaurant worker. He was quite busy. He would eat 1 meal a day at lunch. It wasn't a healthy meal. He had a milkshake, burger, and fries pretty much every day. He lost 80 pounds. That's a lot of calories in those items, but it was still under his caloric needs for the day, so he lost weight. It wasn't because he was only eating 1 meal a day. It was because he was under eating, maybe having 2,000 calories in that meal, and it was less than his body needed, and so he was burning fat tissue as a result. Okay, so it is up to you how long you want to fast, but you really need to pay attention to your body. And you also need to pay attention to your psychology when you start restricting yourself in this way. I would advise against really long fasting periods, especially for women. There is some research coming out that really long fasting windows, 16 hours and longer, may not be good for us hormonally, and shorter fasting windows are advised. Men are more resilient when it comes to fasting, women not so much. So keep that in mind. Also, a 4-hour feeding window is really short. It can be socially isolating. Let's say you want to go out and eat with friends and stuff. Damn, you already ate for the day. Now you get to watch them eat. You know, it's socially isolating. It can lead to binging. Binging can happen when people feel restriction. It can be psychological, it can be physical. So you need to be careful here. If you have a history of binging, I would advise against intermittent fasting or any kind of dieting, really. You also can't maximize nutrient uptake and anabolism, which is a fancy word for muscle building, when you limit yourself to less than 3 meals a day. And basically, if you want to optimize muscle building, you want to spread your protein out between 3 and 4 meals a day. Ideally 4 for maximum muscle growth. Now your 4th meal could just be a protein shake, but this is when we're getting into nutrient timing. So the more you can spread out grams of protein over 3 to 4 meals over a longer feeding window, the better off your muscles will be, because they'll be fed a constant stream of amino acids to nourish them. So if you're only eating 1 or 2 meals a day, you're going to have to eat a whole bunch of protein in order to at least get your recommended protein in to grow muscle. That's a lot of protein in a single serving or 2 meals. So this is where it gets a little tricky, right? If you're serious about changing your physique and building muscle, you probably want to have a longer eating window. So you can have 3 to 4 meals and eat a little less protein per meal. You also don't want to intermittent fast if you're active in strength sports or endurance activities. It would make it difficult for you to partake in intra-workout nutrition, which is the kind of nutrition you have during an activity. Let's say you go for a 2-hour ski. You're going to need to feed yourself during that time, probably carbs if you're an endurance athlete, and post-workout nutrition, which could be, you know, protein shake and carbs. And that's going to be helpful in tissue repair, in recovery, in maximizing anabolism, and helping your performance, okay? So if you are intermittent fasting, now you got to do your workouts within your feeding window, because you're limiting yourself, right? Some people do enjoy intermittent fasting. It can be helpful for more sedentary people. It can help them spontaneously eat less food because they're telling themselves, hey, I have to stop eating at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. There's no going in the kitchen and opening the fridge and snacking and stuff like that. And as a result of giving themselves this artificial window, they are naturally limiting the amount of calories they consume in a day. And it's that caloric limitation that is creating the weight loss. It's not anything magical or hormonal about intermittent fasting. It's the sheer fact that you're eating fewer calories because you're confining your feeding to a certain time. But again, if you overeat your calories, eat a whole bunch of food, a whole bunch of calories during that feeding window, you can gain weight intermittent fasting. But intermittent fasting can be good for people who don't feel hungry during their fasting window, and they enjoy being able to eat larger amounts of food, larger meals. It can also help squash a snacking habit, and that can be helpful for people who tend to graze a lot at night and nibble and things like that. So if you're a non-breakfast person and your natural tendency is to consume most of your calories in the evening, you might be better off not using intermittent fasting and experimenting with a high protein breakfast earlier in the day. That can be a solution to your snacking because that's going to help your blood sugar. And in my experience, the reason why people aren't hungry in the morning is because they tend to eat late at night. So they still have undigested food in their stomach. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what time you eat. What matters is how many calories you consume over the course of a day. So it's not like if you ate at 11 p.m., you're magically going to gain weight. No, it all comes down to how many calories did you consume in that day. There is nothing magical about intermittent fasting. It can simply make people more aware of how much food they're eating and limit their food intake. Intermittent fasting seems to work best for people who truly don't feel hungry during their fasting window. And for some people, going 16 hours without eating can create more hunger, which can actually backfire and lead to overeating during the feeding window. So if you decide to give intermittent fasting a try, experiment. You think that, the pros balance out the drawbacks, the benefits balance out the drawbacks, you might wish to start exploring with a shorter fasting period, such as a 14-hour fasting window. And as I mentioned to you before, women seem to be more sensitive to extended fasts, so you might not want to go past 16 hours. So maybe experiment with a 12-hour or 14-hour fasting window and a 10 or 12-hour feeding window. And you can increase the duration as desired. You could then the next day try an hour more fasting. You do not have to be rigid about this. In fact, we don't recommend that you be rigid about this. One day you might be hungrier than another, so listen to your body. If you decide you had intended to fast for 14 hours, but you got hungry, no biggie, break your fast. And in fact, that's what breakfast stands for, break fast. You can also use intermittent fasting in conjunction with other types of tools like flexible dieting to help you lose weight and achieve your physique goals. But until you get the hang of it, if you are, working with us in the New You program or the Transformer program, I recommend you track your food still, and you can experiment with intermittent fasting if you like. Just let your coach know. Just make sure that you're not under eating or overeating. It's really important you get enough protein and fiber in. And you don't need to try intermittent fasting, but if you're curious, why not, right? But start small, start easy, start with 12 hours, see how you feel. All right, if you have any questions about intermittent fasting, I will be monitoring the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know if you're already intermittent fasting, how that's going for you, if you're enjoying it. All right, take care.